Hey you! I'm Dallas Ann, creator of the Violet Pie, and you're listening to Knitting Myself Together. This season revolves around the theme of knitting in public, and today I'll be chatting with you about knitting while traveling, whether that's for work or pleasure. So, confession time. One of my weird fantasies is public transit. Now, I get it. The reality of public transit is that it's gross and dirty and you're constantly in contact with strangers, and that's not necessarily always enjoyable. But for me, the idea of being able to knit and be productive while still traveling to where I need to go, that is, I can't even begin to describe how amazing that sounds. So instead, I settle for knitting while I'm being transported by other people. It doesn't happen too terribly often, but I can be fairly charming and persuasive when I put my mind to it. And I do have people in my life who actually like driving because, they're crazy. So sometimes I am not behind the wheel and I can just knit as we go. That's not always foolproof. I'm plagued with fairly regular migraines and they cause me to be really stupid. Like, I forget things that you would never think someone in my position would forget, like my knitting. So sometimes I find myself in the car without my knitting because my migraine made me stupid, and then I'm just up a creek. This whole situation has done nothing to help my constant fear of running out of yarn. Somehow, somewhere, some place, I'm not going to have enough yarn and I'm going to need to knit, and there's going to be nothing I can do about it because I don't have enough yarn and I've run out. And who wants to frog a project that they've just finished simply to be able to knit it again? Well, maybe I would if I truly found myself in dire straits. But that would be a whole level of terrible awfulness that I don't even want to contemplate. This perpetual fear of running out of yarn really manifests when I'm traveling, especially if I'm flying, because there are no yarn stores in airports. There's just not. There's bookstores, which is a fairly appropriate substitute. But really, I've got to be prepared while I'm flying. And if I'm flying on one of those terrible budget airlines that just simply get you to where you need to go, and they limit how much you can bring on, like this one time I was traveling out to the West Coast, and I was on that budget airline that you have to be able to fit everything you're bringing on the plane in this tiny little box that slides under the seat in front of you. I mean, I could pay a premium to check my baggage, but that kind of defeats the purpose of utilizing the budget airline. So I just make do, cross my fingers, and hope for the best. Hoping for the best on this particular trip was not cutting it. I spent the whole morning at work stressed out that I didn't have enough yarn, so on my way to the airport, I stopped by my local yarn store and picked up a skein of yarn that complemented the outfit I was wearing. It had to complement my outfit because my purse, the only thing I was carrying on the airplane with me, literally did not have enough space for a skein of fingering weight yarn. So I took the tags off, untwisted the skein of yarn, and popped it around my neck like a cowl. During my travels out, I got a couple compliments on my very beautiful, modern-looking scarf, which I gotta admit made me chuckle. I didn't actually own to these people what it was, I just went about my way. Now, looking back on this whole thing seems a little ridiculous on a multitude of levels, especially considering I never actually had to pull out that yarn to knit as a project. It's actually still sitting in my stash because I got to experience the amazing yarn truck. Now, before I go any further, yes, what you're mentally envisioning is in fact what this yarn truck is. Somebody found a food truck, scrubbed it up, painted it beautifully, and converted it into a yarn store on wheels. Brilliant. Completely brilliant. And I kind of wish I had thought it up. Anyways, outside is this darling light blue. Inside is this crisp white with shelves that are actually kind of tubs also, so that the yarn is easily stored and it doesn't go flying everywhere when they're driving. I'll put some pictures in show notes and also link you to a couple articles I've seen recently if you want to read more about this amazing place. Anyways, because it's such a compact space, they carefully curate the colors and line of yarn that they carry. Now, I know that local yarn stores are very careful about their color and brand curation, but there's something about such a finite space that accentuates this need even more. Something else I find super amazing is that next to each line of yarn, they have a sample knit up of how it's going to look on your needles. Whether it's a shawl or simply a swatch, they have it for every type of yarn that they have in there. I found that incredible and immensely helpful, and I've only seen it with a few lines of yarn in various yarn shops I've been in, but not for every single line of yarn that's carried. It was amazing, and I could not stick to my budget. I ended up buying enough yarn to knit a full shawl, and every time I wear that shawl, I'm flooded with the amazing memories of the great experience I had on the yarn truck. Now I have to ask, when you travel, do you pick up souvenirs or knickknacks from your excursions and your adventures? You know, like fridge magnets or postcards or t-shirts. I love the idea of having something to evoke memories from my trips, but knickknacks really don't appeal to me. Postcards, I don't know what I'd do with them, and t-shirts, those are super fun, but as much as I want to embrace a jeans and t-shirt lifestyle, I just can't do it. I want to, especially with all those amazing comic book and movie t-shirts out there. I'm kind of a geek. The crew necks bother me, and the sleeves never fit right. Anyways, that's a tangent for another time. T-shirts, great idea, poor execution in my life. So what I found is that I love to seek out a local yarn store to wherever I'm visiting and pick up a skein of souvenir yarn. Then I can use my time, whether while I'm traveling or after I get home, to create something that I can wear, and when I'm feeling sad and lonely or gloomy, I can put on that item and have all those wonderful memories flood my emotions, and things are a little bit better. I've discovered that fingering weight is really the only skein to go with when I'm getting souvenir yarn, because I can make socks, cowls, a small shawl, hand warmers, arm warmers, a hat. The options really feel kind of endless when it comes to a standard skein of fingering weight yarn. If I bump that up to worsted, Aran, or bulky, the heavier the yarn, the more narrow my options become, and I really don't like that. I've tried it a few times, and I feel fairly boxed in when I get a heavier weight yarn, and that's just not enjoyable, and I find myself having that yarn just simply languish or age in my stash, and I never end up using it, which is kind of sad. So, fingering weight all the way. The first time I got a souvenir skein of yarn was when I was going with a couple girlfriends to Madison, Wisconsin. It was a blast. It was a weekend without children, significant others, responsibilities or obligations, and it was truly beautiful. On the way up, I cast on and finished a colorwork hat, and I was kind of panicking. Yes, I had other projects with me, but come on now, you and I should know how I feel about running out of yarn. So when we hit up the local yarn store, I got my first Zauber ball. It was a gorgeous black and sort of ocean blue blend combination, and I had never worked with it before, let alone worked with a single ply fingering weight yarn. I was kind of skeptical, but willing to give it a try. Got back to the bed and breakfast, cast on for socks, and I did not look back. I finished that pair of socks while on the trip, and I wore them constantly afterwards. Not only were they comfortable and squishy and wonderful, but, memories. It was perfect and really propelled me forward on any trip I took after that to make sure I always got souvenir yarn. I am forever on the quest to find the perfect balance. Not too much yarn, not too little yarn, just right. That Goldilocks perfection. Now, I got to admit, I always err on the side of too much yarn. I've had that bite me badly in the past. Well, the 2 times in the past that I didn't bring enough yarn. I assumed that the local yarn store where I was going to go visit would be great. And from all the pictures online and the reviews I read and the pictures I saw, it all looked great. It all looked like yarn that I would love to use and would be perfect for that souvenir skein for when I ran out. Turns out, the owner was lovely, the people in the shop were lovely, but it was all, I don't know how else to describe it other than grandma yarn. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how else to describe it. That's not a derogatory term. It's just not something I actively seek to add to my stash or work with. The colors weren't right. The blends didn't feel good, and no. So because I ran out of yarn, I was stuck with merely the company of my books because, I don't just bring yarn with me, I also bring something to read. And it was just way too sad of an experience ever to repeat again. So when you're deciding how much yarn to take or what types of projects to bring with you, do you take into account the type of traveling you're doing? I mean, for me, the setting and where I'm going and why I'm traveling all play heavily into the yarn and projects that I take with me. Like, are my kids coming with me? Are other people's kids coming with? That requires a completely different level of knitting than if I'm traveling alone or with other adults. Also, is this a trip? Be it going with kids, because traveling with kids is never a vacation. That's always a trip. Is it a work trip, or is it truly something for pleasure and leisure? Those settings require completely different projects as well. When I'm traveling with kids or I'm traveling for work, I tend to bring fairly mindless, simplistic, straightforward projects that if I have to frog back, that's not going to make me cry all the tears. Also, I tend to bring less yarn with me because I assume I'm not going to have as much time to knit. When I'm traveling alone or traveling for pleasure, I always bring more yarn than I do clothes because why not? And I tend to bring a little more complicated of projects. What really highlights the bringing more yarn than clothing phenomenon is last Christmas, I went for a week to visit a friend who lives like about 9 hours away. I had a very small backpack full of clothes for me, and they were all comfy clothes, leggings and oversized t-shirts and flannel button-downs, the cozy clothes that I generally don't appear in public in, but if I'm lounging around on the couch watching TV with friends and knitting, is totally the right way to go. The yarn that I brought could barely be contained in a gigantic duffel. And on top of that, I had yarn shipped to her house because what if I got bored or frustrated with one project and my second project was a complete dud and my third design project wasn't working out? I would need a fourth something so that it wouldn't be a complete and utter failure of a trip. Besides, we're driving. That means that there's a lot more space for fiber, right? I'm very proud to admit that I got 5 projects done on that trip, 2 design things, 3 personal projects, not a single gram or ounce or shred of fiber went to waste, and the amount of yarn I brought was a fairly accurate representation of what I was able to accomplish. Now, that didn't prevent my friends from giving me a lot of good-natured grief about it, but whatever. It all worked out in the end. Another difference I've discovered when it comes to knitting for pleasure trips versus knitting for work or just simply going on trips is that I don't cast on new projects when it's trip or work related. Generally, those settings mean that it's going to be stressful, and I don't want to have stressful memories associated with a brand new project. But if I'm traveling for pleasure, 9 times out of 10, I always cast on for something new. It feels like a new project absorbs so much of that energy, that positive feelings that I get when I'm on that trip, and I always re-experience those when I wear that item again. And who doesn't want that to happen? Now, the drawback to starting a new project for a pleasure trip is that I have this ridiculous, compelling urge to finish it before I've unpacked when I've gotten home. Otherwise, I've got this project that's so close to being finished, but it ends up just being in hibernation and languishing away until I heave a great sigh and force myself to finish because I need those needles back for something else. I don't know why that is. A part of me feels like it's a, oh ho hum, I'm knitting now on this thing that I had while on vacation and now I'm back home. You know, that sort of drudgery. I don't know, but it never really ends well if I have to finish a project after I've unpacked. I've often wondered if that quirk, that personality trait, is somewhat hereditary, something I may have inherited from my grandmother. Because I have this memory from childhood of she and I going through a dresser drawer that had these gorgeous skeins of vintage gray yarn. And at the very bottom was a partially completed man's cardigan. It had herringbone and cabling, and the detail was just amazing. The thing was, though, I had never seen my grandma knit before. So I asked her about it, and the warmest, happiest smile crossed her face, and she proceeded to tell me about this time that she and Grandpa went on a road trip, and she cast on for this sweater, and the plan was to finish by the time they got home. Now, Grandpa gave her a lot of grief, saying that she wasn't enjoying the countryside of their road trip and taking in all the sights and wonders of their great country. But she just kept away. She said that her needles went clickety-clack as Grandpa took the car down the road. And the thing was, though, she did not finish by the time they got back, and she could never bring herself to pick up the needles again because life took over, and work and children, and the opportunity never presented itself again to be able to finish the sweater. There's a part of me today as an adult who desperately wishes that I had that sweater with me so I could finish it. Even though it might not fit me or anybody I love or care about, it'd be sort of symbolic of tying the memories and emotions from one generation and bridging it to the next. Because Grandma had such fond stories to share about their trip, and it tied in with her knitting. And my experience of hearing her stories and taking it in from another generation. Maybe that's a little romanticized, but I really wish that I was able to do that. One of my most fond projects that I cast on for a trip and finished before I unpacked is this gorgeous shawl. It's a sport weight shawl that the pattern was originally written for fingering weight, but I decided I wanted a shawl that was basically a blanket that's socially acceptable to wear in public. A friend of mine gifted me this amazing yarn from Knit Picks. It's a wool, silk, and alpaca blend, I believe. It's called Paragon. It is so squishy and vibrant, and the twist on it is just amazing. I cast on for this shawl as we were driving up to Lake Michigan, where we were going to be spending a long weekend camping. I'd never been up there before, and as a West Coast transplant, I can't even begin to express how much I desperately miss the sound of the ocean and the crash of waves and the sense of expanse that the sea provides. And my friend said, well, this isn't the ocean, but it's as close as you're going to get in the Midwest. And also it's salt and shark free. You really can't beat that. So I cast on the way up, worked on it the entire weekend, whether we were in the car or at the fireside, after we ate, in the morning before breakfast was ready, and watching the sunrise and hearing the birds wake up. But most importantly, I knit on the beach. And yeah, I know it's not exactly the same as the ocean, but it's pretty damn close. The scents and the expanse didn't smell right, Salt hair wasn't a thing, but that's okay. It hit all the rest of the notes that I needed perfectly. If we had hit the same amount of traffic coming back home as we did going there, I would have been done with the bind off by the time we pulled into my place. But that wasn't the case. I was halfway through the shawl bind off, so I scampered upstairs to my apartment, and before I opened my bags, started laundry or anything, I finished the bind off. And that was the perfect conclusion to one of my most favorite trips ever. And now, every time I wear this socially acceptable blanket in public, I have these amazing memories to carry with me of friendship and Lake Michigan and the sand and the sounds. It is perfection. Now, before I let you go, I thought I'd give you some updates on my off-the-air projects. I'm still working on that Afghan. As you can hear, those needles going in the background. That's the Afghan. I'm beginning to realize that I just don't do well with unpredictable knits. Like garter stitch shawls where the whole thing is garter stitch. Those items are incredibly wearable, and I always think I'm going to like doing it, but I get to be about a third to halfway done, and I just, it's such a chore to finish them. Turns out, never-ending stockinette blankets are exactly the same. But I will continue to push forward because I want an Afghan. I've got big plans for this thing when it's done. And I can't put those plans into motion until it's off my needles. Another thing I'm working on is designing a transitional garment that can help bring summer clothes into the fall. Also, I really hope to be able to release this sometime in late July or August, because while I don't want to give up knitting in the summer, let alone knitting practical things that I can take off my needles and immediately use, I don't necessarily like knitting sweaters and heavy-duty things in the summer, and there's only so many pairs of socks I can knit. So how does that sound to you, some sort of transitional something? What does that look like to you? And also, what do you knit when the weather gets hot and gross? Do you knit at all? Do you just put it aside? Is this a seasonal hobby for you? Or do you push through and persevere with other types of projects? I'd really love to know, because that will help me know what to design for you. You can let me know through comments on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, or the blog. You can also drop me an email. All of those links can be found in show notes or also at thevioletpie.com. I'd love to be able to chat with you about this. Please consider supporting me through Patreon at patreon.com/thevioletpie. Doing this helps keep everything alive on the interwebs and yarn on my needles so I can create new patterns for you. If you shop at Amazon, would you please consider going to my website, clicking on the Amazon button, and bookmarking that landing page? That won't change anything for your shopping experience on Amazon, but by purchasing through that landing page, everything you order will send back directly 4 to 8% to me. It doesn't raise your prices, it just simply takes the profit away from Amazon and helps me create things for you. A huge thank you to the invaluable support and assistance of Susan Phillips and Jared Bainter. Without their skill and aid, this all would still be a daydream instead of a reality. You truly are the best for choosing to spend your time with me. Until next time, keep that yarn moving.